those kids home from out west.
Welcome to tonight's City Council work session for Thursday, September 5th, the revaluation. I'm going to pass it over to Roseanne Luntz, who's going to go through a presentation, and then we will have a number of questions, and then, as always, public comment at the end.
Thank you.
Roseanne.
Thank you. Tonight I have with me Mike Torello, Vice President of Vision Government Solutions Appraisal Division, David Cornell from Cornell Consultants. I also have a member of my staff, Chuck Reese, who is our commercial assessor. So tonight we're going to go over the revaluation process, our market analysis on commercial and residential properties, what the preliminary results are, and then where we are in our timeline. The goal is market value, and the city market data determines values. We conduct an in-depth study of city sales, determine building value and depreciations, determine rental rates, vacancy rates, cap rates, and expense ratios. We determine land prices, delineate neighborhoods, determine condo complex adjustments, develop computer models based on all this market data we've collected. The state of New Hampshire has some review standards that we must abide by at least once every 5 years, and during the review process, assessments must fall between these standards, where our median ratio needs to fall between 90 and 110%. Our coefficient of dispersion of our median ratio is no greater than 20, and our price-related differential is between 98 and 103. Now, a coefficient of dispersion basically tells us how far apart everybody is from our median ratio, what if it's within 5%, 10%, 3%. And the price-related differential tells us if our high-end properties are overvalued in comparison to our low-end properties and vice versa. So those are the statistics that we look at, and those are the goals we try and meet. And these statistics also bring us into what we always refer to as assessment equity, where everybody is being valued the same or within a tolerance of being the same.
Yeah, so the coefficient dispersion basically is that bell curve in school. So the higher and closer it is means it's lower. So that way it's more points to the midpoint. So we started out, you'll see the numbers with a higher one because it's been 5 years. And then through all the work we've done, it's now lower and tighter and more equitable.
So our ratio settings and review standards, I broke it down into 3 explanations for tonight. What we were for our 2023 state equalization ratio study, which occurred between April 1st, 2023 and September 30th, 2024. Our median at the state equalization ratio study was 67.7%. Just prior to the revaluation and prior to any adjustments that were made, our median ratio was 61%. Our price-related differential was 101.04, which means our high-end properties were undervalued in comparison to our low-end properties. And our coefficient of dispersion was 18%, which was reaching that tolerance. These statistics are extracted from qualified sales, which occurred between April 1st, 2023 through March 31st, 2024. Now, after the revaluation and the analysis, our median ratio is falling at 99%. Our price differential is falling right at 1, which means everybody is on a level playing field, low end, high end. And our coefficient of dispersion is at 6%. This looks at adjusted assessments on qualified sales, again, that occurred between April 1st, 2023 and March 31st, 2024, and they are also supported by the 2022 sales we reviewed for our analysis. So as I mentioned last night, the data we used for this revaluation were sales utilized for 1 year for residential, sales utilized 2 years for commercial, and we also reviewed Marshall and Swift cost estimator and sales data to support the vision cost models that were developed. So in our commercial market analysis, we look at the industrial markets, we look at the research and development properties, the light industrial properties. In our commercial market, we look at office, retail, apartments, and then we break it down into Pease Tradeport and the downtown. There's a lot of other commercial properties mixed in to this analysis, but these are the main ones that we were able to group together. So this next slide is our ratio study for the commercial properties, and as you can see, there's not many sales. But we did want to show where our ratio was and where it has gone. So the yellow is the ratio prior to the revaluation, and the orange is the ratio after our preliminary assessments have been developed. You can see we're at 70 and 95%, so we're falling within the tolerance for our new assessments. But again, these are 27 sales, and although we don't have many sales, we do utilize our income analysis to develop our commercial values, not just the sales. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So we still are in the, well, we're not in the middle of the process, but we're at like the 90 percentile. So the commercials are not quite done yet. What we do is we set all the rates. We did everything at a mass level. Then we go through each type of property, as Roseanne identified, and the neighborhoods. So like Pease is done, condos are done. So we're kind of still in the middle of downtown and then the Strip and the outer areas. So this is preliminary, but we still, the numbers will change. So like that 95 might be 99 when we're done. When you see some of the other adjustments, they will slightly change too. The core values are there, but we're doing some fine tuning, just so you're aware of where we're at with the commercials. Residentials, we're all set with. So we kind of do it in groups as we value, so we can be specific and deal with those types of issues for every type of property. Looking at condos is a different hat. The residentials are a different hat. The commercials are many hats. And so we do them cycles as we do them. So we're getting near the end now, and the commercials are usually the last that we deal with. Just so you know where we're at.
So the next slide, I broke it down where our commercial property values have changed. So you can see I have an overall commercial industrial group of apartments, mixed use, retail, office, commercial, hotel, motels, and industrial properties. The blue indicates, the blue chart indicates where the median change in value was. So it's saying apartments went up approximately 65.5%. Mixed use went up approximately 55.8%. Retail went up approximately 39.7%. Office 37.3%. Commercial 36.9%. Hotels, motels 21%, and industrial 20%. And we're still looking at properties. So that hotel and industrial, we're still reviewing those right now. So that's why they seem lower than what those other properties are.
The specialty properties are the ones we usually do last, because they're very specific. We do them almost individually. So the hotels, we haven't done that final look, so that could change. Will change. Most likely, yeah.
And I also broke it out into the Pease Tradeport and the commercial downtown. So you could see what has been going on in the Pease Tradeport. Retail, there's not much retail out there, but it did go up. Commercial overall went up 29% out in the Tradeport. The industrial properties, 18%, and the office, 9%. And the office, Pease Tradeport is complete. For our analysis, the offices out of Pease are having a difficult time right now. So they have not, they've either stayed level or they've dropped in value during this revaluation. Commercial downtown is very strong, as we've all seen. The apartments have gone up about 64.9% in the downtown area. The mixed-use properties have gone up approximately 57%. The retail, 49%. Office, 44%. Hotel, 35%, but we're not done with that yet. And commercial, which is our mix of commercial properties down there, about 35%. We're still reviewing that commercial downtown, but those are where our values are right now. So the next slide just goes over what's been going on in the media, and everybody's been hearing how other communities are having the same revaluation changes that the city of Portsmouth has had. Exeter has seen like mobile home prices skyrocket to 149%. Hampton has seen their property values go up 53%. State over in Maine, York, 50%. So Portsmouth is not alone. So, and then we look at the Concord Monitor, the New Hampshire Business Review, and they're all reporting the same issues that are going on in the state of New Hampshire with the market values and revaluations. So in our residential analysis, we look at single-family, condominiums, mobile homes, 2 to 3 families, and then a scattering of different other property types, vacant land, so on. On this page, this is a ratio analysis. It shows where the ratio was before and where the ratio is now, and these are broken out by neighborhood. They're also broken out by 2 years' worth of sales in the left-hand column and 1 year's worth of sales in the right-hand column. You can see significant adjustments in these neighborhoods. I do have neighborhood maps that are online, so if you want to know specifically what where these neighborhoods are, you can look on the market delineation maps online. Like neighborhood 101 is in the Strawberry Bank area. 102 is over on the water area off of Newmarket, and then 108 you can see is also in the Newmarket area. You can see there have been significant increases in neighborhoods within the residential properties. The bottom, you will see the mobile homes. That says 400, 402, and 403. Those are mobile home neighborhoods. Also, you'll see the number of sales that are associated with these increases to the neighborhoods. One sale does not make a market. So what we do is we try and go in to look at other similar neighborhoods to get more sales involved in our analysis. So this slide, I just wanted to break it down a little bit more. This shows our preliminary old to new percent changes. Again, this shows the percent change in the neighborhoods for residential properties. I also broke it down into what manufacturing, condominiums, single family, and 2 to 3 family increases are. So what manufactured housing is 85.9% right now. Condominiums have gone up 61.9%. Single family homes, 60.7%. And 2 to 3 families, 45.8%. Our single family median assessed value today is $762,600. So it has changed from when I approached the City Council about the elderly and disabled exemption median. So I have a bunch of revaluation resources out on the assessor's webpage. Will be detailed sales reports and analysis out there for taxpayers to review. Vision has an online database that you can connect directly to. And then, like I said, there's also MapGeo, which will have all of like different maps. It'll have the market area maps, so taxpayers can get an idea of where our analysis is and what we did, and have comparisons. I also have tonight David Cornell, who helped develop a search tool that I had spoken about that I'd like to, if you don't mind, give you an example of what this will be. And this is something that taxpayers, I think, are really going to want to utilize for research and to see where their neighbors' property values have increased also. David, can you?
Sure, thank you, Roseanne. So this is a couple pages here. So the first page is a sales qualification page. So the user will be able to search by street name if they want to search by a specific street name, the size of the neighborhood. And so as Roseanne was discussing before, there's certain neighborhoods within the city. You could do the sale date. So technically, we've gone back to 2019, but you could then sort this by sale date. Also, if you want an exact date on the calendar, and then also by the property use, and so particular property uses, or even by style, or building style. So I'll just pick a style here. So let's say we said Cape Cods. This will filter the list to a particular Cape Cods, and then there's a link here which takes us to the Vision website that has a lot of detailed information on that particular property.
It'll also have the field card. Can you click on the field card?
Yes. I got the Zoom.
And the
thing.
field card is the actual official property record card for the city. So everything is going to be right here. This has never been available before. We have so much more information than we've ever had 5 years ago for taxpayers to review. We always speak, can you go back to the main screen, David? We always speak about location, building size, neighborhoods, building style, when you go out and you want to try and find comparables to bring in during these hearings or to get an idea if you're fairly assessed. So we developed this so they could pinpoint those areas that we keep saying, this is what you need to look for. So, and then it's easy to go back and forth between a sales review and then just to try and find out where you are in comparison to your neighbors. So this is a search tool that will allow people to look at in comparison to their neighbors or any property within the city of Portsmouth. So go ahead, David.
So this also has, if you want to search on a particular use, so let's just say for bank buildings, obviously there's not too many bank buildings, but this will search by a particular use. You could do particular neighborhoods, also street name. So if a particular street name, you could even go to the ownership level. And so, the nice thing with this filter is these filters cross-filter each other. So notice if I go to Adam Street, it will filter the owners from just Adam Street. You can clear all the filters back.
And it toggles back and forth with those sales report and the old to new buttons up top. So it's actually very nice, very fluid. We try to make it as simple as possible. But anybody that wants to use this and is having issues, just call my office. Anybody in my office should be able to lead them through this. But I hope that people utilize this, especially for their hearings. For the abatement process, this will remain on the city's website. I probably will have this going forward from now on. I think even on an annual basis, people like to see what's going on in the city and the sales. So.
Yeah, it ties into when we do the hearing process. Our team will have the record cards, and they'll have these reports also sorted by neighborhood and by style and so forth. So if the people are in, first, usually what we do is we'll ask them, everything okay with the record, look at your data specifically. A lot of times they'll ask, well, what sales did you use, how'd you develop it? So they can also, at the hearing, show them these reports and how they work and how they display, and show them the actual properties that were used to support their value.
And I also just want to state, these are only the qualified sales that we have within the city you use. No, nothing that's unqualified will be out there, only qualified sales. So we've even included sales that have happened after the assessment date of April 1st, so people can see what the sales are doing going forward. And
Great.
any questions?
Counselor Moreau.
You just said qualified sales. Could you describe to us what makes it a qualified sale?
There's a lot of things that we use. One is arm's length transactions, which I've talked about, willing buying, willing seller, nothing underlying within the transaction. If the property has had a building permit after the sale, that sale is no longer valid because the assessment doesn't represent what the property was when it's sold. If it's sales between owners of abutting properties, relatives, bank sales, there's a laundry list of of things that unqualify a sale. So,
I ask more questions. On the list of P's, when you spelled that out, there is a hotel out at P's, and I didn't see the hotel listed there. Is it accommodated someplace else?
It's the last one I have to do.
Okay.
Because you put it aside because you like to do all the hotels at the same time. It's very observant.
I'm a real estate attorney, so, I spend a lot of time at Vision Appraisal all across the state, so, and 2 states. I guess my last question is, you talked about the uniqueness of condos, and I know that has to do with the common land ownership, and how do you judge those differently, or how do they affect appraisals differently?
do you want me to do it?
I can do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So condos, especially here, are very unique because there's a locational situation, and then because they're so unique in the sense of the structures, the age of the city and all the different things that are going on. So it is an arduous process, but there's a lot of sales. But Roseanne and I worked probably a couple weeks on it. And we have to deal with them as groups. So we did all the residential condos first, and then we look at them as a style, and then we go down and break it down by complex, and then within the complex, we break it down by N units, levels. There's a lot of mixed condos where you have retail and office on the first level, and then apartments on the second level. So we broke it up, like I do everything, into pieces. We did the residentials first by their styles, we have different styles, and then by the complexes, and then in the adjustments. And then we did the commercials. The last thing we did was the mixed use because they're the most difficult. There's sales, and we can look at the trends of sales for 5 or 6 years. Even though they're older sales, we know the patterns of change. So if we see something in 2020, then we know that there's probably like a 45-50% difference. How is that trending? So there may not be any 24 sales, but there may be 22 and 23. So of course we use all those, and if there isn't any, then we go to common structures. So we'll be in a certain neighborhood or a lot area, and we, mostly downtown, there's so many, and we know the breaks. We know like when you're at one street or the other, where the layers are as the values are higher near the water as they phase out, and then get past geographical areas. So all those things are taken into consideration when we do it. Then when we're done, we look at them as old to new changes. What are the patterns? What have we seen? Are we accurate on these? What was it? And as we went along, when we would do certain ones, we had a trend that this area would go up 50%, and then this area might go up 30%. And so there were normal trends of near the water and downtown, and then as it tiered out, the values would drop a little bit because of the locational effects. So there's a lot of things that come into effect when we do it.
Thank you.
Counselor Cook and Counselor Tabor and Counselor Berg.
Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question on the assessment process, given the low number of sales. Everyone knows when they only have a small sample size, it kind of has a tendency to skew statistical analysis. So how does that low number of sales impact you? For example, when you only have one sale in a district and you can't determine, is that an outlier or would that be a standard sale for this neighborhood?
So you can go across boundaries for comparables, and you can go historically. So there are only a certain amount of sales in 2024. There's a certain amount in 23, but the last presentation or evaluation was 5 years ago. So since that point, there's been sales throughout that whole time period. So we can look at that whole time period and adjust for trended time to see if there's more data that we can gather. So we gather more historical data, but we also gather neighboring data of common type elements of structure, so that we can get more sales into the picture.
So I guess my follow-on question is, what if the challenge is, say you have a house that has sold in a neighborhood, it's the only one that sold in the neighborhood in the last few years, but it's a real outlier, like it was an abandoned property that hadn't been lived in for 10-plus years. So its valuation is clearly not
Indicative of-
indicative of the neighborhood, and there isn't anything that's sold. And how do you then square that against the last sale was in 2022 or 2023 in this neighborhood? And the valuations have changed significantly since then, so how do you?
We identify through all the groupings, percentage changes during that time period. So what were the changes? We know that things have gone up 50, 60% as a whole. We do studies in between to see what the percentage changes are. So those are trend adjustments. So we use those trend adjustments as assistance to bring it back to this year. And we also look at, if we don't have a lot of sales, we don't necessarily look at the one or two sales. We do if they're indicative of the neighborhood, like you said, but if they're outliers and not, we'll look at similar neighborhoods with similar housing. And that nothing is perfectly the same, that's why it's a different neighborhood. But we'll know what neighborhoods are similar to it, higher or lower, will account for that adjustment along with the historical adjustments. And use all that data, because there's actually a lot of data. It's just the problem is there's a lot of unique data. It's not the most homogeneous area. It's one of the more difficult communities to do in New Hampshire. Now, I've done it 4 or 5 times, working with Roseanne each time. So we're familiar with the process and how to do it. And it's also the common sense approach to value. There's the 3 approaches, cost, income, and sales, but to me, there's 4. You know, are we common sense looking at something and putting an appropriate or reasonable value on it? So there are a lot of indicators that come in, but we have a lot of techniques and a lot of data.
So that was my, kind of my follow-on question is, are you confident you had enough data to come up with valid pricing for?
I think we have a lot of data, and I think that we have a lot of techniques to do the work. Again, it's mass appraisal. These are unique properties. So it's not a perfect science, obviously. But we're looking at it at many different angles. And that's the thing that's most important about this analysis. We're looking at it based on the construction size, the lot size, the age of the property, the construction of the property, the location of the property, the sale price quartiles of the property, the sale date of the property, the construction grades of the property. So a lot of times how I equate this is, you know, are we going to make sure that that table is really round, that I can only see it from here? What we do is we look at it at all those different points and make sure that all of them fall within the requirements of the IAAO and the standards that we need. That's the greatest part of the mass appraisal software product that we have, is we'll look at things and we do macro to micro. So we'll start out with the classes, then we'll go to the styles, and then we'll go to the neighborhoods. Then we start to get down to the details of lot sizes, building sizes, age, grade, which are elements of the structure. But as you do the macro to micro, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter when that COD goes from 18 and we have it down to 6. It's because we have the ability to make all those adjustments from that view of the table all the way around, so we know it's a round table and not like a curved in area. And all those statistics are available, and they're all meeting the standards, and they're all very close to the 100%.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Tabor, then Councilor Lombardi.
Thanks, Your Honor. That was my big question about the neighborhoods that had one sale. But when you say grade, you're talking about the condition of the property?
No, so grade is quality of materials.
Okay.
Condition is the upkeep.
And is that a visual inspection, or is that, how do we get that? How do we do those?
It's a visual inspections that they do all the time and so forth, and it's the guidelines that we set up for doing the inspections and following it. Roseanne has very detailed, consistent ways of reviewing the grades, the conditions, the elements, what's renovated, what's older, what needs to be repaired, totally renovated, partially renovated, excellent, good, fair, all the way down to unsound.
And when you say renovated, that's including renovations inside?
Inside and out, yep.
Okay.
So if you're, on sale properties, it's real easy. I mean, everything's online. We can look at all pictures and everything online for sale properties. So if we don't get into a property during a sale, we have the ability to still review the property. For interior properties that we haven't been into over the years and refusal of entry, we look at what's typically going on in the neighborhood and we value it based on what is typically happening in the city of Portsmouth. In Portsmouth, renovations, new kitchens, new bathrooms. So, and then that sometimes also not only affects the depreciation or the, it also will affect the quality of the structure also. So everyone says, don't let the assessor in your house. Well, that's probably one of the worst things you can do, because then I have to estimate it based on what's typically going on in a community. And in Portsmouth, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars in renovations that's typically going on.
Right, right.
And all the permits are inspected too.
Okay.
Yeah, we
So
do
that's
every
another way to-
permit, yeah.
another
We
angle to
have a
come
really
at it.
good entry rate, so I'm pretty confident in where our values are as far as the home itself.
But I would think typically when somebody is going to sell their house, they're going to renovate it, have a modern interior.
We
Where they
find
sell.
a lot of sales that still to date don't have permits. So the only way we know that they've been renovating is through pictures of sales.
Okay.
Sometimes, believe it or not, as nice as they make it, then they just go in and re-gut it anyways. They wanted the location and the bones,
Yeah.
but they want to do it their way.
Yeah, and that's a
It's
trend
amazing.
here. Yeah, that's a trend here also.
And last question, is it still a general rule of thumb that property closer to downtown or closer to the water is going to rise in value more?
Yes, that is what we have been seeing. We always see that the closer you are either to the waterfront or to the downtown area, the more desirable the location. That's for residential and condominiums.
That walking element is huge in this community.
Councilman Barty.
I'm concerned about renters and the value of apartment buildings. I wonder, we've had a lot of new apartment units built in the city. I don't have the number, but there's been a lot of them. And yet we also have older apartment buildings. And how does that interplay, how do those things interplay with each other?
Well, New Hampshire only has one goal set for me, and that's market value. So I have to value it based on what it would sell for, not on its current rents, but what its potential is. So, and what we do is we look at advertised rents, look at what we've gathered from appeals that are rents, and we utilize that information to value those income-producing properties. The market will only bear so much for rent increases regardless of my assessment. So I'm obviously, and everybody knows that a landlord will typically increase the rent because of taxes, but it's also what the market will bear at the same time.
So,
I can add a little bit to that.
okay, all right, yeah.
So again, you're right, there are newer housing structures, there's older housing structures, there's housing structures with character, there's kind of straight line type of places. So again, the elements that I talked about before with the grading, the condition, and the location, that's also tied to apartments. So as we look at construction costs and sale prices for the 1, 2s, and 3s, getting up to the 4 or 5 units or higher, we look at rental adjustments, vacancy adjustments, expense adjustments, and even capitalizations, because those are the 4 components that work to value an income-producing property. So we have the same characteristical adjustments where for rent, it can be the quality of it, or the use, and the location. So let's say an average apartment rents for $2,000, but the high-end ones may rent for $3,500 or so forth. We have tier adjustments from stuff that might be dated and away from the city proper to right down in the city. And that, again, is analyzed the same way, just like the houses are, locationally, the type of structure, and how the adjustments affect the final value based on all those characteristics. So exactly what we do for the sales, we do the same thing for the income.
Thank you.
Councilor Bagley?
Thanks, Your Honor. Could you just briefly, for commercial, explain CAP and then how we use CAP to calculate the assessed value?
So we gather data from the city, and we're gathering information for rental information, vacancy information, and the expenses to operate the property. And then what happens is when we gather all that information, we also use information externally from surveys and different things that we use. We put it all together in our models, and then what it is, it's an income stream. A cap rate or capitalization rate is a calculated formula that takes an income stream and converts it into a present value. And it's taken into consideration. It can be done by extracting it from a sale. If you have a sale price on a property and you have a net operating income after the rent, the vacancy, and expenses, you can divide that and it creates a percentage, a number, which is the capitalization rate. You can get it through financing information, interest rates, yield rates, loan-to-value ratios, long-term, and build what's called a band of investment technique, which is a mathematical calculation. So there's different ways to extract the capitalization rate. They're all market-driven, and they're all specific to different classes of types of apartments. Once you get all that data, the income streams, you capitalize it, and you get an income approach. Then we compare it to the land values we developed, looking at the cost approach. We look at the cost of the building, we depreciate it, we add the land value, we add any outbuildings and so forth, and we get a cost approach. And then we look at the sales that occur. There's not a great amount of them, but there's plenty of them, especially if we look over a few-year period and trend them. We look at that approach, and then we look at the income approach. The income approach is usually more the governing body of an approach for commercial, where the sales approach is more the governing body for the residentials. And then we use the fourth approach, which is the common sense, and we reconcile them to what is an appropriate value.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up on that? And that's a great explanation. And in New Hampshire, at least, we can't directly ask, or maybe we can ask for the cap rate, but nobody's required to give us the cap rate, which is why we have to extrapolate it.
Most people wouldn't know what their cap rate is because it's extracted from sales, but it's done by usually appraisers and realtors and people that are using it for valuation purposes, or a real estate attorney for a defensive value, maybe. So it's not like you could ask someone, like you'd say, what's your rents? Oh, my rents are $2,500 a month. How much vacancy do you have? I have $30,000 of vacancy, which is 8%. What are your expenses? Oh, well, all my expenses are, $150,000 or 35%. What's your cap rate? What's that?
You don't know until you sell the property.
And they still wouldn't know or care. It's not an element that can be extracted in the sense of a person asking them for your financial information. They don't give you the cap rate at the bottom. They give you what the final NOI is, and they give you extra expenses than you need, so you can take out the loan, the interest, the amortization that are finance items but not real estate items. Then you get the NOI, and then you get a sale, and you can extract it then, and you can get it through other methods. But a cap rate is a development tool that's done by the evaluator.
Great, thank you.
A quick question when we talk about vacancy rates. We know that New Hampshire has one of the lowest vacancy rates in the country. When we're using this as a tool in the analysis, are we looking at individual buildings and also judging whether it is a volunteer, like people are not renting or not leasing out commercial buildings to look at maybe their own revenue, however they deal with things. I guess I just wonder, because there are some turnover And I'm wondering how, like, when we look at vacancy rates, are we looking at individual buildings or overall? So I guess my question, and as I'm working it out in my head clearly, if you look at an apartment complex with 12 units and you're finding that the owner says 50% of these are vacant, but we know the average vacancy rate in our town is like 2%, are we now, how do we, I guess, analyze that? Because I would view that as a voluntary action on that owner's part.
It's an excellent question. It's probably one of the
As
best
I worked it
questions.
out, it came out well.
Yeah, no, I got it from the beginning.
Thanks.
That's an excellent question. And it's not an easy thing to do, but there is a method to do it. And so what happens is with vacancies, we gather all this raw data, like you said. Some are at 50, some are vacant, right? 100%. And some are fully occupied for 10 years. They do gathering data, CoStar, all these different. But the best way to look at vacancy is to look at the holding period, okay? So the holding period is usually 5 to 8 years, maybe 10. So let's pick 7, okay? And let's think about what's going to happen to that property over the 7 years. And sometimes it might be fully, say it's one building, might be fully vacant for a year. And then it's rented for 100% for 4 years, and then they split it in half of it. We look at it as what would it be for the holding period? What is a reasonable vacancy for the whole time that someone holds it? And if you took a couple samples and took the amount of months that it was fully vacant, fully occupied, and partially vacant, and averaged that out, then you probably get a reasonable number. And as you say, the vacancy is really low here. Well, you're generalizing a little bit because there's about 60 types of commercials in your town. And the vacancy rate for apartments compared to the vacancy rate for office space is a fairly large variance.
You actually just triggered what was going to be my next question is, again, how do we then differentiate them? As in, where, and is it a factor in our assessment when we say, the market clearly doesn't dictate this anymore for Class A office space, but that landlord is still trying to deem that? Does that make sense?
Sure, it certainly does. We have a lot of data on the commercials.
Yeah.
And we look at it as individual groups.
Okay.
So there's, 100 office buildings, let's say, in the community. A lot of them are in Ps. But there's office downtown. They're both office, but they're different animals. All right? So they're valued as offices, but there's adjustments for location and use. So like we do, like I said earlier, for the houses, we do the same thing.
Okay.
We have all these abilities to, here's the middle of the values, and they can be in one end or the other. We have all the tiered adjustments for all the requirements for a structural building, an income building, and a housing. And we make adjustments by looking at what's going on, all the variables of that property. And then we deem what we think is appropriate. Then we compare them all. We have a great report we call our economic income report. It runs them all by type and by per square foot or by unit. And then we look at the variance and say, okay, then we break them up into location and other things and see if they're equitably working. Once we think they're working well, then we run it by old to new to see what the patterns are, excluding something that was renovated or demolished or whatever, and see what those patterns are. Roseanne showed you a fair amount of that today with the ratios of the sales, the old to new changes and so forth, and the same thing that we do with the income information. So the system is a great tool. We have added tools that David has provided to us, and I really don't want to tell you this, but if you added up the years of experience between David, myself, and Roseanne and Chuck, it's just too big of a number for me. And we've all seen it at different ways. Chuck's worked for the Department of Revenue, Roseanne an assessor, Dave's done just about every job there is, and I have done this same job for 37 years.
Counselor Tabor.
So, when it comes to this income analysis, though, a building owner is not compelled to give us the answers. I mean, if we say, what's your vacancy rate? What are your rents? What's your income? He's not compelled to tell us that.
Not at this level.
Not at the state, in our state.
No, but we have a lot of information, just like through the abatement process, I request, if you're an income-producing property, you have to give me all of that information before we even will consider talking to you about your value, because you're fighting your value, that's what your value is based on, is that income-producing property. So we get the vacancies from them, we get the rents from them, we keep that information, we give it to Vision so they can enter it in our system. I have so many resources out there where I can go out and find rents and vacancies and expense ratios, and we can even find cap rates. So we have a lot of that information. Vision puts that information in their system, produces this report for us to analyze so we can value the properties within the community that are income producing.
And one other thing, in this day and age of computers, if you type in a property, right, you'll be amazed at what's the trail of information that comes from them that they tried to list 3 years ago, and it's out there on LoopNet, or it's on CoStar, or it's on Redfin, or whoever it is. The trail of information is astounding.
Well, I'm sure that, there's a lot of information that's public just through advertising these, but what about the commercial building where the tenant's 5-year lease is up and the landlord says, look, hey, if you sign another 3 years, we'll knock 30% off the rent?
Sure, that's right. Yeah, we see that too. But we know the set patterns of where it should be. And then when we run and get income and expense, or we get information, we know the outliers.
So we're
And
not
we-
looking at the management of the property. We're looking at what it would sell for in the open market based on what a typical expenses would be, typical rents would be, typical vacancy. So if
And
somebody
the
choose,
assumption
right,
of good management.
right, and good management. So if somebody's purposely leaving their building vacant because they're waiting to redevelop it, or, just want to hold on to it because they bought it for investment purposes, it's going to be valued like everybody else, not based on its being vacant.
Good question came up last night. I'm not sure if you brought it up or one of the people did. What if something's redeveloped and it's under construction? And it was an older building and now it's at a higher and best use. How do you value that? What if it's at only 15%? So we would value it as if it was complete with the new structure, with the permit, and all the specs that went with it. Then we would put the UC on it. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll cap it out, run it, what I think it's going to be, and then we'll have a value endpoint. We'll look at all the construction costs, and then we'll UC it based on a chart we have that says the foundation's done, the frame's done, and it's at 30%. And then we hit it at 30%, but I already know pretty much what that value is going to be when it's done, and I'll do an income approach to it and have it ready for when it's completed.
So Mike, just taking that maybe one step further, specifically for the commercial properties, if we rezone properties and now their highest and best use is potentially to have housing as a part of commercial where office research was only available before, how does that affect the value specifically of the land? As Roseanne says, is what it would sell for immediately. It would sell for more based on those zoning changes. How quickly are they taken into account from the time we pass zoning to the time that you calculate those properties?
Well, unfortunately, in this state, it's every 5 years that they do it. I do a lot of work in Massachusetts, they value every year.
So if we valued every year, and we have in the past had more valuations, is it, I guess, as soon as a zoning change happens before April, we can expect those to appear in the next available revaluation of those properties? And
Yeah.
maybe Chuck is looking.
Well, yeah, I just want to comment that every year we look at properties for physical changes and/or zoning changes, or just economic changes. So the mechanism is there, so when there is a zoning change, the highest and best use may be different. Every year under our statute 74-1, we can go in and adjust it for that.
Okay, so if something, so I guess for clarity, if something is is one thing, but we have changed the zoning to allow for another thing, that those taxes on that will be based on the highest and best use of the property sale, taking into account all of the
Yeah.
differences on that.
Once we understand what the market dynamics are of that change, it may or may not change it, but we fully know that if you're going to zone something to allow residential or apartment, commercial type use, there's
And
a good chance it's going to impact the value.
And specifically on that, you have to take into account, it can't be anything that is a conditional use. It has to be based on what is zoned by right, or does it take into account potential other conditional uses that might be present there? Does that question make sense in terms of like a density bonus?
I think I do. I think I understand it. So basically, we're going to look at what's allowable, and typically, it's highest and best use. As a fee appraiser, I will sometimes look at a community and see how often the zoning board would do that. On the mass
Okay.
level, we don't get that deep into the weeds. We're going to kind of wait to see what the
So
market
if
plays
we,
out.
if we see that once zoning change sales start to occur, and we start to see that that change has affected value, we will make that change.
Okay.
If we see that a property received approvals, we value those approvals. We don't wait until the next revaluation, because we are allowed to value a change, and zoning or approvals are considered a change.
Yeah. I'll give you a really good example. There was in Westwood, Mass, there was a University Station huge development mixed-use thing, and so it was all rezoned. But not all, it was an industrial park. Not all of the sites were changed. The industrial buildings on a few of them still stay, but they were within that envelope. So as the values were valued by sales and income, that land neighborhood adjustment changed. It went up quite a bit from an industrial neighborhood. So those properties, their buildings are still what they were, and the cost of those buildings were appropriate, but their land went up significantly, because we all knew that they were going to sell those buildings, that land, and tear that building down, and would become part of the next phase of this big development. So sometimes it's a period of time where maybe only the land changes until the structure catches up with it.
Correct. And the land is a part of that. I think something that, and David, I want to thank you for putting that application together. I think that the feedback that I've gotten over coming into this process versus previous processes is wanting to understand the process a little bit more, and I think that's going to enable a lot of folks to be able to do so. I think what would be helpful when we talk about commercial properties and the impact they have on the city and the tax rate in future years, to be able to look at what some of those zoning changes would have on the effect of the underlying land. Certainly not expecting that this year, but as we go through the master plan, to have some of that to have some of that in our back pocket, to understand what some of those zoning changes might mean to the total valuation of those properties. I know you guys are already working really hard, and by all the answers you've given, incredibly smart. But if we could have some of that going into the master planning process, to put data behind some of the changes we'd make and how that impacts the tax rate, especially as this will come into focus in the commercial versus residential balance, it will be helpful to steer some of those conversations and the decisions and trade-offs we'll have when we make zoning changes and look at that, to try to incentivize, a broader tax base that not necessarily is impacting the school, which is half of the tax rate. Councilor Bagley, did you raise your hand?
I did not.
No, you did not. All right.
Your Honor, can we ask Roseanne to go back and hit item number 4?
That's right. Yeah, we forgot. So appreciate all of is there any other questions on this? Seems like we've had a good discussion on that. Want to go to the timeline for the assessment notices, and then leave room for public comment and then
Skip right over the timeline.
We started asking questions. I'm going to blame Mike. Mike was eager to give answers on some of these questions, so yes.
She's
let's-
been working hard. I thought it'd take a little bit of the heat.
Thank you. So right now, as Mike was saying, we're in the process of finishing up commercial valuation and a few other outliers that we've been waiting on. So we're hoping within the next 2 weeks to have valuation notices out to taxpayers by September 16th or 17th with
Nailed out.
mailed out, and with appointments hopefully starting the following week. I have 3 weeks' worth of rooms reserved. Mike is doing not only in-person hearings, he's doing phone hearings. So we'll have plenty of people to be able to help taxpayers understand the process if they have questions. And from there, Mike will send out final hearing notices for any changes which have occurred to the property for the hearing, or any properties that he felt needed to change based on information that came in. He explained that last night. So I'm hoping by the end of October, hopefully, to have everything turned over to the city, hopefully by the middle of October, middle to end of October. I want to make sure we have enough time on our hearings, so, because this is such a big change in valuation, that people have the ability to speak to somebody. I will have a tax rate calculator set up, hopefully when the notices go out, so people can look to see what's going to happen with their taxes based on their new value.
And that will be noted in, so I guess like I'll preface it, it'll be noted in the letter that's sent out that there's an ability to look at the new
You
tax
can,
rate.
yeah.
That'd be great. I think that a part of this, it's not going to happen. The properties aren't going to go up and down evenly across the city. If every went up by the same percent, then it wouldn't matter. It would just be on us on the budget. But since there'll be differences there, I think there's been a conflation of valuations are going up, so taxes are going up. But if tax rate goes down, taxes stay the same. They're just not all going to be equal across the city. And as much information as we can give to those folks when they get that information to see those resources would be great.
Yeah, and we're one of the only communities that actually does that.
I-
And I think it's a great help for taxpayers. So we try and make sure every revaluation that we do for the taxpayers.
It's been a few years since we've done one, so it's, and I appreciate all the effort that's gone into giving all of the education around this. Are there questions specifically on the timeline before we open up to public comment? Councilor Moreau.
Just a quick one. So when you say you'll finish all the data in mid-October, is that when it then gets uploaded to all the online?
No, it's going to be uploaded before the hearing, so right when the hearing. So it's a research tool for taxpayers to use. It will change once the values are final, but this is all our preliminary analysis, preliminary numbers that I want taxpayers to be able to have access to. By law, I need to produce a list of before and after values for everybody. I'm going to do hard copies of that also in my office in case there's people that don't utilize computers.
Thank you.
We'll have the percentage changes I mentioned earlier available at the hearings. So I think that's really one of the big items, because people will come in, how can I go up 55% or something like that? And then we'll show them by neighborhood and by type of property what they've gone up. A lot of times when they see that, I'm like, oh, mine's lower than that. It's like, yeah, it is. You're a little bit on the lower end of it. Oh, that's good, right? And it says, yeah, sure, that's good. But then they just calm down a little bit when they understand more.
Sure.
Especially when they say, how can that go for $700,000? And then we show them 4 sales of colonials in certain areas between $650 and $750, and they're like, wow, they really buy it for that number.
Yeah, I've been saying that for the last 2 years. It's like,
Sure, it's,
you know?
yeah, it's difficult, my mom and dad, they bought the house for 12 raspberries, in 1980, so it seems like it's hard to imagine that they have.
Now it's a couple bushels.
Yeah, so, okay, I want to save time for public comment. David, Chuck, Mike, thank you for being here. Roseanne, thank you for all the hard work. Nathan, you got out easy so far today. I appreciate you being here as well. We'll open it up for any public comment that we have.
Petrie Huda, 280 South Street. Thank you. This is a great presentation. Roseanne, I do have a question on something I don't recognize and that it appears that we are paying for. So I pulled the 2023 New Hampshire State Equalization Valuation, and the numbers make sense. You take the modified assessed valuation, which you do, and then there's an adjustment for inventory. The question I have is, can you tell us what is the 2023 equalized railroad tax that gets added into here for the total equalization value?
It's a number, we get that from the state, they send that to us. So it's a payment to the city. And I'm not sure how they calculate it, but it's something, if they do a forestry tax payment to us also. So I don't know, does Andrew, do you know any more about that?
Andrew's in the back.
You know
He's-
anything more about that? Yeah, it's just a number that they give us. We don't know how they calculate it.
So that-
It's based on, it was always based on a railroad corridor, but that has changed over years in the city of Portsmouth. But that calculation comes from their utility appraiser, right, Chuck?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and it increases our equalized valuation.
Right, because they're adding value back into the city.
Okay.
And Roseanne, sorry, just for the folks at home, can we talk into the microphones?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, yeah, it adds value back into the city. So anything that's going to add value to the community, they adjust in the equalization.
So the bottom line is we are, as residents and taxpayers, we are paying for this state calculated tax, I guess you could call it. That,
So in the equalized properties, why it takes a little bit to calculate the actual tax rate is that we also have to think about how much we give to the county. The county's developed based on the amount of property that we have. It's not based on the number of individuals or citizens that we have in Portsmouth. So they add all that up, and there's another payment that we have to make to the county based on our equalized value and a portion to the county. And so there's a little bit of time that goes into that, and I guess the railroads are the benefit of having commerce, I guess, through the railroads is added back in. I'm sure the Islington Creek neighborhood views it differently, but that is what it is.
It's calculated as a revenue. So like our pilot payments that we get from different entities, they calculate it back in on my MS1 to adjust my value to set the tax rate.
okay, I mean, the reason I was asking is I compared it to a bunch of different areas. We are the highest, except for Manchester and Nashua. So
It has to do with the length of the railroad bed.
goes through the area.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Petra.
Jim Smalley, 352 Kearsarge Way. Couple of quick questions. This came up at the session last night and wasn't addressed here. It relates to the exemption. All right. I understand it's going from 500 to 750, and you get 50% of that as your exemption. Is that prorated, or is it a hard dollar stop? Right? If
So
you hit,
you're talking about the elderly exemption? The
So
elderly.
speaking of the elderly and disabled exemptions?
yes.
Yeah, it's, so if they're approving, let's say, $500,000 off the assessed value, and your assessment is $500,000, it totally goes away. Your assessment goes away. So it's all based on your assessment.
So what if it's 501?
Then you get a tax bill for $1.
Okay, all right, so it's prorated.
Yeah,
Good,
yeah.
okay. Do you know the ratio of construction cost to market value when you're doing your assessments and your appraisals? Do you have that data?
Can you be more specific on that?
In other words, if you were to build a building and it cost $250,000, but you're able to sell it for $300,000, is the difference between market value and construction cost of $50,000? of that data when you're doing your analysis? Or is that available?
No, specifically, those are
Hey, Mike, hey, sorry, we got it,
Thank
the
you.
folks at home.
I won't be looking at you. Specifically, that's permit construction and not necessarily based on our market value of the property when doing the cost approach. So we look at the different permits, but we usually do more of like Marshall and Swift. We do look at new construction. We talk to builders, and we really set it more on what those numbers would be, not as much on a specific property, because also you have to deal with the time of what's going on, and so it's usually not something we do a calculation against. We do them more based on what we set up for what's market for the construction.
Okay, so, but you would have an estimate of the construction cost?
We would have an estimate for construction of the building, correct, is one of the elements.
Right.
And we would also have information from the building permits, but not necessarily from the builder themselves and all the other costs that went with it.
Okay, understood. You mentioned the vacancy rate, Assistant Mayor Joe. If current vacancy rate for properties is roughly 1%, and I know it varies for different ones, you also pointed out you would use a time frame of 5 to 10 years, perhaps 7. If it was currently 1% for certain rental properties, would you bring that down to a normalized rate of 5? And if it was currently 8%, would you bring it up to 5? Or how would you adjust something that's got that very low vacancy rate?
Yeah, again, look at the time frame of the properties on an average, what the average vacancies would be for that time period. Because there can be a time, like you said, where it's 100% occupied for 2 years or vacant for 2 years, but we're not going to put zero a value on it. So it's amortized and leveled off for what an average would be for the holding period.
Right, so are you using past vacancy rates for forecasting the future, or using a normalized rate? In other words, if the normal vacancy rate should be 5%, are you using 5% or are you using 1?
We're using a normalized vacancy.
Using a normalized rate, okay. And the last question I had was on the commercial valuation properties, on that slide, your preliminary commercial value changes by property type. Is there a different way that and I know this is just simply a math error, but is there a different way that these are calculated? For example, when we go from prior value to current value, first one, go from 3.312 to 4.357, that's a 31.57% increase, yet it's showing as 41.54. For the Pease Airport, it's 23.41 when it's actually 14.12.
Oh,
Is that just a math error, or are they applied differently in terms of how they're valued or something like that?
I believe those are showing median values.
Median values.
What is the 40, so what's the 23, at the total down below? It shows 23.41%.
That's a combined median.
That's the combined median.
Combined median. Okay, so the current value versus, so it's not simply the current value divided by the prior value?
Yeah.
Okay.
What they are is, they're all the points.
Mike, the mic.
Oh, sorry, thank you. There's all the points of data, and then that's a point of data, where the median really isn't relative to that point of data. It's the median of all the data.
Okay, all right. So it's not simply that division. All right,
It's not
thank
a
you.
calculation off the prior and the current. That's what you're working with.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Any other folks want to speak at public comment?
Hi there, Charlie Barlow. I wasn't planning on speaking, so forgive me if my question isn't as fully formed. I was really struck that, we're basing this on the number of sales, and of course the number of sales, the volume of it is pretty low. And we talked, one of the councilors asked about the definition of qualified sales, and that really struck me, with one of the conditions being if there was a building permit, they're excluded as being a qualified sale. And I've been in Portsmouth for a few years, but we just bought a new to us house during the period that you were basing the assessed value on. And we have a building permit for a fence. The fence fell down. And our house, looking at like the median for our neighborhood 101 in the south end, like our house, we bought it for like 50-some% of this median value. So, had it been a qualified sale, it would have been beneficial to, I assume, everyone in our neighborhood at bringing down that median. So I'm kind of just curious to learn a little bit more about, given the very finite number of sales that we have, the basis by which decisions were made on what was a qualified sale and not, because, from my perspective, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking about, houses like mine that need the most work, that sold for the lowest value, are being, benchmarked against the houses that needed no work and therefore no building permits.
So when we look at
Thank you, Charlie.
when we look at building permits, like if somebody's just doing minimal work that's really not going to affect the bottom line value, the assessment, we don't unqualify that. But if somebody's like putting $300,000, $400,000 or $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 worth of work into their house, we do a sales ratio analysis, and that's based on the current assessment at the time of the sale and the sale price. If that current assessment changes because of building permits, we no longer can use that number. So that disqualifies the sale just for our analysis, not that it wasn't a good sale when it occurred. Is that?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm pretty ignorant on this, as I'm sure
No,
many of us
no.
are, so thanks.
Yeah.
Certainly not. Thank you for the question. Any other questions tonight? Seeing none on Zoom, I just want to thank Roseanne again, your team that's put this together, Mike, Chuck, and David. I think that it's been a few years since we've had revaluations, and so being able to have this process start back up again in terms of the information that we're given is really important. So that's, I guess, the biggest point is that we're starting earlier because we kind of got out of the swing of it in Portsmouth. Also, just the amount of data that's available to residents, I want to call out and thank your team for providing. I think that was one of the biggest things that we've heard as counselors in terms of online discussion, emails, personal conversations. It's like, how do I understand this? And I think that what you've done this year, starting early before people get their revaluations, and also with the work that's gone in to providing, as David built, some of those tools, it allows everybody to be an advocate for themselves in that. And that's super important. And I know that everybody is going to appreciate that as they go through that process. And then finally, for the folks that are watching at home or might watch this later on the recording, to be able to know that there are humans behind this process, that we are valuing thousands of properties throughout the city. It's impossible to look at each one, the character that a house has, what it might sell for. You're using data to have that. The larger conversations will happen one-on-one on those informal reviews. It's really important that Portsmouth understands your job is to be fair and to fairly value the properties. It's harder for you to do that when folks, we're in New Hampshire, live free or die. We're not letting assessors into our house, but there's a cost associated to that when they can't see inside. You have to make assumptions. So being able to know, as we've learned on the council, and I've certainly learned in my time in the council, that your job and your passion is to try to bring fairness to this process is something that I hope the city understands and takes advantage of, because behind all the data, there's humans on both sides of this. There's humans, that are paying the taxes, and there's humans collecting the taxes and wanting to make sure it's as fair as possible. So I want to thank you for all the effort that's gone in to these last 2 nights, that you've asked to have these conversations before the assessments have went out, to allow people to understand them, and for all the work that you're going to do over the next couple of months in terms of completing this and also having these conversations. So thank you, Roseanne.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. We don't have to, there's no motion to adjourn. We're just done. All right. Good night, Portsmouth. Thank you.